So I'm here to talk a little bit about what you do when the best isn't good enough. And in particular, tie it to this incredibly interesting presidential election. And when it came time to think about how we're going to talk about the 2016 presidential election, I naturally went to children's books, right? Where else would you go? Goodnight Moon, Green Eggs and Ham, Goodnight Gorilla. These were my kids' favorite children's books. These are the best children's books. I'm sure you know them. If you don't read them, they are the best children's books. And I read them every single night, and my kids loved them. And I kept reading them. And the older they got, I still kept reading them because I loved them, and they loved them, and they were the best. Only my kids got older. And as they got older, even though these books are the best, I mean, who doesn't love Goodnight Moon? It dawned on me that it's not what my kids wanted to hear anymore, because they really wanted to hear Curious George. Goodnight Moon's still a great book, but they didn't like it as much. They liked Curious George more. And that's what happens with kids. They grow up really fast, and so the best books weren't really the relevant ones anymore. And I think about that a lot when I think about CNN, and that's why I started with children's books. CNN used to be the best political team in television. Think about that, the best political team in television. That's really something to say, and it was a slogan for CNN throughout a couple of different political cycles, and it's a powerful slogan, and we liked saying it, and we said it a lot.
CNN Tuesday, it's election night in America, and the best political team on TV is back in action.
What this means in terms of change.
Every CNN show all night long. Election night in America, CNN Tuesday night starting 8 Eastern. CNN equals politics.
Right? So the best political team on TV, we were proud of it, we talked about it, it was true, the best political team on TV. The problem is, much like my kids, the rest of the world was getting older quickly too. The media business was growing like a weed, and it was changing in two really interesting ways. So this reflects the overall audience. This isn't just news, this is everything, media writ large, but it's really the same in news. Two really interesting trends were happening at roughly the same time. Television audiences were gradually declining. CNN has an enormous television footprint and a really powerful TV network. We continue to, but the reality is our digital audience, just as powerful, is growing faster than our TV audience is. At the same time, digitally, we have one of the biggest desktop homepages on planet Earth. We were in a great position digitally to conquer this election cycle. The problem is desktop audiences were declining pretty significantly, pretty rapidly, as mobile audiences were booming. Everybody has at least one phone in their pocket. That's how you get most of your news. So it didn't, not only was it not good enough anymore to just be the best political team on television, we couldn't be the best political team on desktop anymore. We had to be the best political team, period. As if that weren't bad enough or that weren't troubling enough, at the same time, the landscape was changing. We used to compete with MSNBC and Fox, right? The other cable networks. That was our competitive set. And we'd wake up in the morning and we'd wonder how they did in the ratings and how we did in the ratings. And we said, we're the best political team on TV. We also thought about the broadcast networks, ABC and NBC and CBS. But all of a sudden, as we entered into this political cycle, it was more important than ever to think about ourselves against an entirely different competitive set. We're all of a sudden competing against Politico. We were competing against newspapers that weren't just about the printed word anymore, but they were rapidly innovating and transforming themselves into digital powerhouses. More important, each of these organizations had invested great resources to politics in particular. So what do you do, right? The trends in the industry are changing. Your competitive set is bigger than ever before. What happens? Well, we had a meeting. And this is really where the tipping point was, and it was about 2 years ago, and I remember it as if it were yesterday because we sat in a room, a number of us, and we started planning 2 years ago before anybody had an idea of what this race would look like or who the nominees would be, mind you. But we just sat in a room and we said, how can we be the best political team in television again in 2016, right? What does that look like? And then a few of us started scratching our heads and we said, well, a few people said, well, we are the best political team in television. We'll just keep doing what we've done. We're in great shape. We did it in 2012, we did it in 2008, we'll do it again. And by the way, it's not just on television, we're great digitally. We have one of the strongest websites in the world. What are we all worried about? Well, the meeting went on, And it turned into a pretty heated meeting, and at some point, somebody said, you know what, we're not the best anymore. And that was a really hard thing to think about. And tempers flared, and things got heated, and people exchanged views in the middle of this meeting about whether we were the best or wasn't the best. And ultimately, the conclusion we came to is that in a lot of ways we still were. We could call ourselves the best political team in television, but the reality is what made us the best in the past wasn't good enough anymore. It wasn't going to make us the best in the future. And so we had this meeting, and we started talking about what would it take to be the best? What would it take to be the best in 2016 in a world with different competitors, in a world where mobile was more important than ever before, and where digital was just as important as television, if not more so, because the news cycle starts when you open your eyes in the morning, and it doesn't necessarily start on TV. It starts with whatever device you happen to look at first. So we sat there, and this is how we felt in that meeting, because it's scary when you realize that the best isn't necessarily good enough, but we decided we needed to make some changes. And that's when it got fun. It got fun, but it also got scary. We decided we needed to come up with a bold plan, and so we spent the next couple of weeks coming up with a plan and charting out a plan to be the best. Unfortunately, though, a transition like this isn't easy, and that's where it got scary, because when you set a vision of where you want to go and what it will take to be the best, and you realize you can't keep doing what you did before, you take that leap of faith that you're going to wind up somewhere down the road, and you don't necessarily know where that next step will take you. You might know where the end goal is. You can see the end, but you don't know where the next step is, so you start mapping out a plan. And part of that plan was a determination that we really needed to start over. We had a lot of great pieces in place, and we had a lot of great people, but we didn't have the right goals, we didn't have the right focus, we didn't have the right structure. So we underwent a really painful reorganization with the idea of creating a new structure and a new plan and a new team and a new mission that would let us fly forward and let us be excited and passionate and let us be the best again. But in the process, we had to say goodbye to a lot of really good people. We had to say goodbye and push ourselves out of our comfort zone, and it was hard. And our colleagues in the press took some shots at us. There's a headline there, "Morale Sinks at CNN's DC Bureau." It was written by a reporter for Politico named Dylan Byers, and I'll read you the quote. It says, "Our employees expressed concern that the executives lack the management skills needed to guide staff through the transition, and they complained of a lack of guidance or reassurance from the newsroom leadership. No one has said, 'This is tough, but here's the road ahead.'" So that was largely about me, right? And I didn't feel great reading it that day. We knew there was a plan, and we tried our best, and we had meetings out of that meeting where the tipping point occurred, meetings upon meetings trying to explain the vision, trying to explain the mission. But when you're in the midst of change, especially when you're changing from a place where you're the best, it gets really unsettled, and it was hard. But then things turned around because we started putting the plan into place. And so that headline ultimately became something that we left in the rearview mirror, and the headlines changed and the message changed because we put the plan in place. And we went out and we did what we said we were going to do. We changed. We went out to try to build and assemble a new team. We hired more than 40 reporters from some of the best organizations around and made a determination that we, CNN, were going to be the best political team, period. That we were going to set ourselves up to cover the 2016 presidential race with an unprecedented team, an unprecedented focus, and in a way that we had never really undertaken before. You'll see at the bottom Dylan Byers, the same Dylan Byers who wrote that terrible story before, but CNN continues its hiring spree. It was right around this time that I called Dylan Byers, and I said, "Remember that story that you wrote about us? I think you got it wrong, and we actually have a plan. And when you criticized us and talked about how low morale was, I don't think you gave us credit for the plan. Let me tell you about the plan." So we did, and Dylan wrote that story. Dylan Byers works for us today. Okay? It's good to have a plan. So Dylan came from Politico, and those 40 people we talked about, we went out and we looked at the best in the business. We looked at people who were the best. the best political reporters, the best editors, the best writers, the best correspondents. Didn't matter whether you were digitally focused or TV focused. That wasn't important to us because we weren't building a team for one platform. We were trying to build a team that could be the best political team, period. And so we went and we hired people from all of these organizations. And then when you attract the top talent and you have this army on board, this murderer's row of political talent, you say, okay, now it's time to get to work. And the mission was clear. This is the reason we went and we hired all of these people. The mission was clear. It wasn't to get on TV and talk about breaking news. It wasn't to get on TV and to opine. It was to break news. We hired this team of reporters with the mission of breaking news on every platform. And we set them to work. And the goal, again, was to wake up every morning and lead the conversation, to lead the agenda, to break news, to inform the public. And then we'd worry about which platform to do it on. So these days, you don't know when a story originates with CNN anymore on TV or digital, because really that's not the way you consume news. Much like my kids in their children's books, it didn't matter that I thought The Goodnight Moon was great. They wanted Curious George. It doesn't matter whether we're the best political team in television. Being the best isn't good enough if we're not evolving along with our audiences. So we hired this incredible team, and we unleashed them, and now they break news. And sometimes these stories originate on television, and they wind their way through the ecosystem into our digital properties and off our platforms. Sometimes they begin on our digital platforms, and they flow back into TV. This was an entirely different way of thinking, and this is what it meant to create the best political team, period. And then results started coming along, which is nice. It's nice to begin to see some gratifying signs of success. So we hired the team, we lured them in, we put them to work, we pointed them in the right direction, we outlined what the mission was, and then the audiences started responding. So we built CNN Digital Politics, again, out of a meeting where there was an admission that when it came to digital politics, we really weren't relevant in the way that we wanted to be. So we launched this new team, and a few months in, we were #1 by every imaginable metric. Page views, unique users, video views. And it's nice to have that notion that you're succeeding, that you're doing well. You can't rest on your laurels, though, so we kept moving, and then this happened, okay? So we put all of these pieces in place, and that was long before we knew what this field was going to look like. We had an idea that the 2016 race was going to be interesting. We had no idea it would be this interesting. And the reality is, if we had not made the changes that we made, and this race began, and some of the candidates who declared, and we tried to cover it in the way that we had always covered politics as the best political team in television, you wouldn't be watching CNN right now. You wouldn't be reading CNN. You wouldn't be looking at our app. We wouldn't be relevant. We made these changes from a position of strength, knowing that we had a responsibility, knowing that we had to cover this race differently. So when this happened, when this remarkably interesting, fascinating race began in 2016, we were ready. And we were ready across every platform, and so we started running. And when it came to television, we were able to be the best political team in television in such a different way than we had been before. The news that we were breaking every day, the headlines that we were generating across TV and digital kept the audiences tuning into us. And in addition to that, it made it easy for us to go to the campaigns, all of the campaigns. If you remember, about a year ago, there were still dozens of people who were still running for president at this point in time. And we were able to go to the campaigns and line up more debates than both Fox and MSNBC combined, because we had made the commitment to great journalism. We had made the commitment to breaking news. We had made the commitment to covering this race in a comprehensive way across all platforms that our competitors simply hadn't. We could give the digital exposure, the television exposure, and fairness across both sides of the aisle because we had made a commitment to be the best political team, period. And again, it's not just TV. TV is a component of it. And so people would tune in and watch the debates, but we wouldn't have been able to draw the audiences that we drew or continue to draw the audiences that we're drawing if it were not for the strategy of building this political team out across all of our platforms. So 4 years ago, when we were the best political team in television and maybe we had a website, now we have a newsletter that goes out every day, CNN's Political Nightcap, We have regular programming every day on Snapchat to reach an audience that wouldn't engage with CNN on our regular platforms. On Instagram, on Facebook Live, we launched a new politics app. These were all weapons that we knew we needed for this election, which would require something entirely different from us than we had ever had before. And it's gotten to be really fun.
I have a whole young person's agenda.
We're going to abolish the IRS.
Public colleges and universities tuition-free.
Trade, we're going to make great trade deals.
So that's how we've been covering this election. And what you just saw in that video would have been utterly unfathomable to us when we were sitting in a meeting talking about being the best political team in television and trying to scratch our heads and figure out how we wanted to cover this race. The tipping point for us was so clear, and again, that room to me is so vivid. I remember who was sitting there, and I remember the way the conversation flowed, and I remember what we talked about, and I remembered how difficult it was, and I remember what it was like in the weeks after that as we tried to outline our plan. And we saw headlines talking about lousy morale and poor management, and this was 2 years out from the election. And so we were already seeing the bad headlines that I talked about before, and so coming out of that meeting and looking ahead down the road to where you know the end point was, it took a lot for us as a team to come together and figure out what's the way through it. And at that time in that meeting, when we knew that we would need to operate differently, none of us could have envisioned what I just showed you in that video, but that video is the true embodiment of all of the creative work that came out of an extraordinary team effort when people finally came together and said, okay, it's great that we have been the best. It's great that we were the best at one thing. It's great that we were the best political team in television. But there's no shame in saying we're not ready to take on the future the way we want to take on the future. What do we need to be the best tomorrow? And when you do that, and when you can suspend your disbelief, and when you can fight through the adversity and the doubters and the bad headlines, and follow the mission and follow the goal and stay committed to what you're trying to do, you ultimately wind up surprising yourselves. Now, it's gotten very easy in this cycle to criticize the media. And on any given day, we know that we have a tremendous responsibility at this point in time in this particular election to do our jobs, to report the news, to break news, to inform our viewers and inform our users. We take that very seriously. And so the commitment that we made, to do things differently, to be the best, was about you. It was about the audience. And it's why I began with children's books and my kids. It didn't do me any good to continue reading my favorite books to my kids, because Goodnight Moon, while a great book for a 2-year-old, isn't as relevant in the same way once that kid gets to be 8. So as much as I loved it, and as much as my kids may have loved it at one point in time, in order to keep delighting them, and in order to keep informing them, in order to grow with them, we had to change. And Curious George is a great book, and incidentally, they're 10 and 8 now, and their new thing is Harry Potter, and they love it. And I love reading it to them. And Harry Potter, for a 10 and 8-year-old, Harry Potter is the best there is. So that's what brings it back to politics. And it also is this notion that you're never done. In an effort to be the best, in an effort to continue evolving, you're never really done, especially not now, especially not at a time like this, with a race like this, at a particularly pivotal point in this country. We're living through a staggeringly exciting paradigm shift in media right now. And you can feel it around you. You can feel it every day when you look at your phone or when you look at a TV or when you look at a newspaper. We are in the midst of an exciting paradigm shift, so you're never done. And as an example, we just did this a couple weeks ago. We went out and we hired the best political investigative team in the business from one of our competitors, from BuzzFeed. We woke up in the morning and we said, we're trying to be the best. We think we're the best. We're moving towards being the best, but what else can we do to get even better? And we saw an incredibly talented team that had skills that we needed with 30 days out before the election. So we went and we hired them. And to me, this was one of the most important things that our team has done in this cycle. Because oftentimes, when you're making decisions about political coverage, news organizations do it with 4 years in mind. You beef up before a race begins, you hire people, you cover the race, and then you downsize when the race ends. And then those headlines come about news organizations downsizing. That's not what we wanted to do here. We built something sustainable and scalable, and CNN Digital Politics doesn't live for just one cycle. The paradigm shift we made was a commitment to change from being the best political team on television to the best political team, period, with tentacles across every platform that you can imagine, whose mission it is to break news and to serve the audience. And that's what we've done. So what we've built is only going to scale after Election Day, and we will continue to grow and will continue to evolve. And the audiences, hopefully, will continue to come, because here we are 18 months in to what we've built, and we're still number one. And we don't point to the scoreboard to note the score. We point to the scoreboard as a reminder of what can happen when you make a conscious decision to make a change, to make a shift, to step out of your comfort zone. And so that's the story of how we decided to come together in one meeting and look ourselves in the mirror and think about how we were going to approach a really pivotal presidential election at a time when we realized that being the best and doing what we had done before wasn't necessarily good enough. And these two images, I assume many of you have seen, because these have become the hallmarks of our political coverage. And there's a story behind it that's worth telling. So the first presidential debate that we had was at the Reagan Library in California. It's the image that you saw earlier of the Republican candidates lined up in front of Ronald Reagan's old Air Force One. And it was a big debate. It was the first debate that we had of this election cycle, and there was a lot of pressure on us as an organization to produce an important event on TV and digital for our audiences. And in the midst of it, one of our colleagues had this idea that we should, as we prepared for the debate, bring each of the candidates through, and there were a lot at the time, each of them through before the debate began, while they were preparing, and sit them down in chairs, in a trailer, in 80-degree heat, on a stool, with an award-winning photographer and a very advanced camera to shoot portraits. And a number of us, myself included, said, "Are you crazy? The candidates aren't going to do this. They're preparing and they're reading their notes and they're getting ready for this race. You really want to do this?" And this colleague said, "Trust me, we do, and you'll be happy about it." And I said, but wait a second, we have to worry about TV. We have to produce the TV event. Everybody's worrying about TV. We can't focus on these portraits. It's a distraction. And the colleague said, "Trust us, you want to do this." So a number of people pulled together to wrangle each and every Republican candidate to walk them through the trailer and sit them down in the stool and shoot these very elaborate portraits. And there were two candidates that we almost missed. I won't tell you which two, but they really didn't want to do it. And in the course of the night, some of our colleagues were able to wrangle them, and they're great backstories about that. But they all came through, and they sat down on the stools, and each one of them shot the portraits. And the debate happened, and it was a remarkable debate, and it kicked off a string of very important events for CNN. But the next day, when we woke up in the morning, on Instagram and on the CNN.com homepage and on Facebook, we looked at these portraits of each of the people vying to be the Republican nominee for President of the United States. And they were shot like this. And you got to look them in the eyes as a viewer and a user and have a different perspective on the candidates than you ever would have gotten before. And so these digital images that we distracted ourselves from to sit the candidates in the chair right before we were preparing for a big debate became so vivid and so powerful that we use them across every platform, and still to this day use the ones that we have of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This is something that CNN never would have considered before because it would have seemed a distraction. It would have seemed off the mark. It would have seemed unnecessary. It was not helpful to our core mission of being the best political team on television. How to still portraits help you with being the best political team on television. It's just one sign of the creativity and the hard work and the outside-the-box thinking that occurs when you suspend your beliefs on what you thought you always had to do and you set your eyes on doing something different. You wind up with something that you never expected. Whether it's images, whether it's a new app, whether it's a new way of thinking. And so that's what happens when you look yourself in the face and you say, what happens when the best is no longer good enough? Thank you.